Today we are going to be having our EHS Community Connection webinar. This one is how to deliver engaging training during a pandemic. Talking about attention, engaging content, what keeps people, paying attention to what's in front of them versus going and checking their phones, Netflix, all that fun stuff. Excited for our panel here today. We've got Lora Grainger, Jill James, and Brock Young. And without any further ado, we can get started here. Just before we begin, a little reminder. So Zoom has a really great feature. Zoom Webinar has a great feature called the Q&A feature. So for those who aren't familiar, if you go down to your Zoom Webinar control panel, there's a button you can press, and that will look like a chat box, and it will open up a Q&A feature, and you can ask questions there that are related to the topic. We'll be using that to just kind of guide us during the Q&A at the end of the webinar. And it's great because it means that you can thumbs up the questions that you're most interested in. That'll help us address the things that you, our audience, want to see. And you can also reply to each other's comments. So if somebody asks a question and then we're not specifically talking about it, you can still have those side conversations that just help information flow a little bit more smoothly and doesn't have us acting as a bottleneck. If there's something that you'd like more clarity about, or just, ask for more details there, I think you have an answer for, we have these three fantastic people with us, but this is all a community of really exceptional safety professionals, and your knowledge is just incredibly valuable. So we'd love to have you chime in and share what you know. And without any further ado, we're going to get started here. So we're going to go around the table, get a little bit of background from everybody before we go into our prepared questions. So Laura, would you like to start?
All right. Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Lora Grainger, and I am the owner and biorisk management training consultant here at Project Safe Lab. So Project Safe Lab is only about 2 years old at this point, but I really like training and biorisk management. Most of my experience is coming from Sandia National Labs, where I was before. So I'm still here in Albuquerque, and I saw a couple other colleagues from New Mexico on the line. So great to have you guys. Yeah, training's just really fun and creative to me. And then you get that instant feedback when you can tell somebody's, really understood the concept or really makes a difference in their environment. So glad to get to know you guys and our other panelists, and hope to answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Jill?
Yeah, hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking your time with us today. What an honor that you came to listen to us. Hopefully we impart some helpful information. My name is Jill James. I'm the Chief Safety Officer with HSI. HSI, known as the Health and Safety Institute. We're a family of about 10 brands and growing right now, providing resources to the health, safety, and compliance community, as well as workforce development. I'm also the host of the Accidental Safety Pro. If anyone has ever listened to the podcast, it's just for safety professionals where they're sharing their stories about how they accidentally came into the practice, because none of us thought this is what we were going to do, right? When you're a little kid and somebody says, what do you want to do someday? You don't say safety and health. Although I did have one guest who said yes to that. And it's only because her mother is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater in the safety program. So that happened there. I've been in safety and health for over 25 years now, and got my start after grad school as a compliance person with OSHA in the state of Minnesota for almost half of my career. And then I've been working in private sector for the second half. So if anyone has questions they want to ask about OSHA compliance, how that relates to training, I would be really, really happy to answer or try to answer any of those kind of questions as well. And I see somebody just said something about Dr. Scott and Krista Geller. They have both been guests on my podcast. So if you want to hear from the Gellers, you can go there and listen to them.
All right, great. And Brock.
Everybody, Brock Young, training manager at the Environmental Health and Safety Department at the University of Nevada, Reno. Just as Jill said, nobody sets out to be a safety professional. It's something I say a lot. I'm a biochemist. I think a lot of us came from the sciences and the biosciences. So I have a background in laboratory management and the safety side of that, and that's what got me into safety in general. I've been in my current position here with the EH&S department for I think 7 years in various positions before that in laboratory space safety specifically. But I've been in this role as training manager. I think training is really the root of prevention of accidents, of injuries, of non-compliance in the first place. And so I've really broadened my experiences to the occupational side of safety, OSHA, all the different regs that we're not maybe necessarily familiar with when we're coming from a laboratory background. But that's been my particular interest in the past several years, and developing training and helping facilitate training by our other subject matter experts throughout the department.
All right, fantastic. And just as a reminder to everybody, there is going to be a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So I definitely encourage you, if you have a question, thought, an idea, go ahead and pop that over into our Q&A tab. That will give everybody a chance to engage with what you're saying, respond, thumbs it up. Just really nice to have these conversations going in parallel while we talk about our subjects. So the first question is going to be going over to you, Laura. I was wondering, are there any training topics you found to be particularly unengaging or difficult to teach? What are some solutions you found for these? You know, talking about engaging training, well, unfortunately, not everything that we get to teach people is the most riveting.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Safety can be quite dry as far as the topic goes. But, you know, one of the topics that I found that is very, very interesting, and you can almost apply it to any of the other kind of subtopics, is risk assessment. So you're able to, you know, say, well, what is the risk in this situation? What could go wrong? And I like to ask that question a lot, just what could go wrong? And working through the different elements that will contribute to likelihood and consequences in that particular scenario is really useful. And so if you can create a dialogue where you at least engage your learners and think about all those elements, you know, side by side, I find that to be very useful because either people will just say, oh, it depends, you know, for risk assessment, depends on this. That's the answer to everything. But, you know, as professionals in the safety field, we actually do some of that analysis in our head, and it really benefits our students or our colleagues or anybody else kind of working in a hazardous environment to know what they need to look for. And so kind of going back and forth with that is something that I've found to be very useful. And like I said, that it comes always back to risk assessment. So I like to have fun with it, and you can always throw in a what could go wrong here curveball to your audience to keep them on their toes.
Great. And Jill, next question is for you. I was wondering, how can training be a less daunting or at least scalable task for the trainer?
Yeah, you know, I guess when I think back to one of my last jobs before I came to HSI was with a company that had never had a safety and health professional working at it in a 65-year history. So no one had ever been watching that, right? And they had like 11 different brands with employees ranging from PhD scientists to engineers to people working in agricultural settings in barns. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to develop all of this training that's going to appeal to all of these audiences? Like, that's daunting. You know, it was across 5 states and 1,500 employees. And I thought, whew, how am I going to write all this curriculum and yet develop it? And so I ended up doing what I never thought I would do in my career, which was choosing an online safety platform to use that had the content already developed for me. And when I say I never thought I'd do that, that comes from my OSHA background of thinking this couldn't be good enough. And hopefully I can talk about like, how do you know if it's good enough later? But what that opened the door for me to do when I chose a platform that I felt was good and what I define as good. That allowed me then to fill in the, like Laura, you said, being able to give those real life examples so that I didn't have to come up with that curriculum and background. I could really spend my time making it personal to those particular work groups. You know, they all got the same baseline. And so I was assured of that compliance, but I was able to apply it and spend my professional time making it applicable to them to ensure that they had access to the information that they needed to be able to do their work and know that we cared about them. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, personalizing things where you are able to is just such a great way to demonstrate to people that you care about them and that you know you're talking to them, right? You're not just putting this thing together. It's a big monolith and saying, hey, pay attention to this, even though I haven't maybe clearly done the work for you.
Yeah, right. It's like pushing play and walking away from, you know, the VHS tapes that, yeah, many of it, right? Brock is shaking his head. Right. Yeah, that we all know. Yeah.
All points I wanted to make too. Yeah.
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 Good news, Brock. Next question is coming towards you. So speaking of this process of coming together and putting together training that you need, can you tell us about a time where you had to develop urgent training content on a tight timeline and how you did that?
Well, there have been situations over the years, but the most relevant one right now is COVID-19, of course. I think we were all probably under the crunch and to get something out to people who it was a really scary time early on, especially, right? Here at the University of Nevada, Reno, operations got shut down in mid-March. Everybody went home, but the upper administration continued to meet and plan about how we were going to get back to coming back to campus, to get back to doing research and get back to classes and all that sort of stuff. And they'd come up with policies about mandatory face coverings and sanitization schedules and all that sort of stuff. But for some reason, it didn't come to their mind till pretty late in the process that they were going to need to train everybody on campus. So happened about mid-May that we got invited to the table to help develop some of this training. And oh, by the way, can we have it ready in 7 days, right? Totally unrealistic timeline. Fortunately, I knew there was going to be some need from individual departments, something like that. I've been putting together training all along. And as other folks have said, you know, good training has to be relevant. Purchasing an off-the-shelf DVD or something like that only goes so far. You need to train on specific policies, specific procedures, relevant examples, make training much more engaging. You know, pictures from your actual work site, even just something simple like that. Anecdotes, maps, pictures of equipment that they're actually using. But you know, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's basic information out there from the CDC or from OSHA. In academia, we do a lot of sharing amongst other institutions. Arizona State had done a lot of stuff already early in the pandemic for how they were going to occupy buildings and they weren't. And that sort of stuff wasn't relevant to us, but they were able to share with us some stuff about face masks and the virus itself. And in this sort of, you know, really urgent situation for the entire university, I had access to some resources on campus I might not normally have. So we had our director of our student health center, medical director of the student health center, some deans of some of the science colleges that were able to get me several bullet points that they really want included in the training, really important things. And all along, I did a ton of research. I read so many papers and was able to put out training for all employees of the university, some 60 slides arranged into 4 different modules that I narrated with an $8 headset from my kitchen table at home and put it out in I think it took about 8 days. That 7-day thing didn't happen, but by the weekend it was available. It's been really well received because people were they didn't know a thing, right? And they were equipped with a lot of knowledge, and we received lots of heartfelt thanks from that.
Yeah, I will say, if there's really one thing that this sort of whole pandemic situation has taught me, it's that now there really is this impetus to say, don't let the perfect get in the way of the very good. And just being able to put something out early is so much more important than waiting, and it's just worth it. Yeah.
Right. I see flaws in the training I put out, but nobody else does, right? That's the way it goes.
Sounds like you did a great job, Brock.
Great. So talking about trainings and finding those flaws and trying to figure out what makes a piece of training content particularly engaging or not. This next question, Jill and Laura, is for both of you. Could you, when you're evaluating potential training content, could you talk about some specific red flags to watch out for, and also some green flags? What do you look for that shows that this is something, okay, this is really going to be a hit? Jill, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. I had mentioned in my previous comment, I was challenged with finding something, right, to try to solve the problem instead of developing all that curriculum on my own. And when I decided to start looking for online training, I was viewing it from the lens of a former regulatory agent, right? And so the first thing that I was looking for was, could I open up my CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations? Could I go to those training sections for those individual laws? And is what I'm finding on those specific topical things, whether it was personal protective equipment or confined space entry or whatever the topic was, did it cover those particular items that are listed in the law? And that's not something you're always going to get in a YouTube video, right? I mean, so this is doing your due diligence as the person who may be purchasing or trying to find something online. Because we all know if we Google things, we'll be able to find stuff, but we still need to do that due diligence to make sure that the minimal compliance things are taken care of. And then from there, when I'm looking at online training, I want to know who designed it. Was it designed by instructional designers who are using adult learning theory when they're building it? Are they building in ways to assure knowledge transfer is occurring? And if so, how are they able to do that? And so when it comes to evaluating a system like that, I'd really press someone to be able to answer those questions. How do you know it's compliant? Tell me how. Do you work with a subject matter expert? What about your instructional designers? How do they do what they do? How are you building engaging training for knowledge transfer? And what does that mean? And then how often is this training updated so that we're not, pressing replay and it becomes the, 21st century version of the VHS tape, And so how are employees having to engage throughout a course that they're taking online in that regard? So those are things that I would say would be the primary questions that I would ask, as well as, how do we log that they were trained? What sort of paper trail does it create? As a former compliance person, I'm all about the paper trail. How can we show that that all of my employees are trained? And so if I'm under an audit, whether it's from insurance or whether it's from an OSHA auditor, or I'm auditing myself, how can I know that this particular employee at this particular location had their training?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to be forward looking when you're if you have the freedom and the time and the resources to do it, just being able to anticipate what that training will need to be able to do for you down the road can really save you some headaches. Yeah. Laura, oh, it looks like you're muted there, Laura.
I'm muted, of course. No, yeah. Yeah, just to build off of what Jill said, depending on your needs, especially if you're responsible for training a smaller group at your university or your small business or this or that, you may find yourself in the position of being that subject matter expert and instructional designer all at the same time. And so some things that I like to look at when I'm evaluating content is to, one, make sure that it comes from a reputable source, and that's worth the due diligence that Jill mentioned. I like, the CDC, they have a great kind of training section. They also will send you updates when they include any new training on their newsletter or something like that. I also like a lot of question and answer type of elements here. We're working with adults, right? Of course, we need to go into the theory, but the the people need information and answers and solutions right now. And so, for example, on the Select Agent site, I love their question and answer, frequently asked questions section. It's so informative. And so you can almost craft that into a dialogue box, on your slides, for example. So making sure that comes from a reputable source, but then also making sure that you have some of those design elements. You don't want too many words. You don't want too many crazy colors, anything like that. As far as red flags go, and don't feel like you have to cover it all, right? Leave some gaps there so that you can actually be asked questions and see where your students are if they need more information or that type of thing. So, if you get your hands on some of those materials, great. If not, I would say your colleagues and, through ABSA and other professional associations, we're all teachers in some respect, having to communicate what is the risk in this situation or that. And we all have our little pile of training material that we use, and we're all pretty giving. So I would just ask, not only to get the slides or some initial content, but also for those stories, right? That's what makes it really rich. And I struggled with that when I was starting out, is that I didn't have any experiential stories to work off of, right? Because we're just kind of learning as we go. But you can borrow some of those stories. You can say, oh, my colleague was in this situation and they had to deal with it. This is how they did it, So especially starting out, that's what I would recommend.
I saw a lot of nods from that experiential stories comment. Well, before we go on to our next question here, I just wanted to make a quick reminder. It seems like a few people have found the Q&A here, and that's great. Just a reminder to everybody that you can go ahead and drop your questions about training, content, anything you'd like to ask our panelists into that box, and you can respond to each other's comments, have some side discussions. It's a really fantastic way to keep the conversation going when we're not actually talking about the thing that's particularly interesting to you right now. Right. Brock, next question is coming your way. So I was curious about in-person trainings, because right now we're talking a lot about digital content. And of course, we are really struggling in a lot of cases to figure out how to transition those in-person trainings that are normally classroom or based to something remote. So have you encountered any good solutions for remotely delivering in-person trainings?
Yeah, I will say in general, delivering live remote trainings with a specific educational goal, not like we're doing here, we're just kind of shooting the breeze, really relaxed. But if you're trying to teach your normal course, making sure that you convey that information to the trainees, that's exhausting to do in a live remote format. It really is. Unfortunately, it's the best solution a lot of the time for where we haven't had the ability to develop an online course, so there's just a few people that need it. I taught a online remote live 4-hour defensive driving course once early in this pandemic, and I'm not doing it again. Just sitting in a room by myself, trying to keep up the energy and be engaging when I'm not really having much engagement with the audience, really hard to do. We have had some successes though through Zoom, kind of maybe one of the best things to happen from this pandemic. I think most institutions have a Zoom license or something like that these days. The successful trainings, we've kept the number of trainees small, right? Not talking to 40 people, talking to 8, 10. Then you can facilitate conversation. You can call on people directly, just like you would in a classroom. And it's much less talking at, but talking with. I'm a big fan of keeping slides, really minimal on content, just kind of a prompt for the speaker. But sometimes in a live remote session or even an online session, you need a little bit more content there. It's hard for people to stay hanging on every word that you say. You don't want them to miss something that's important. We talked about telling stories, telling relevant examples. That might be a good time to turn off the screen share and have just the video view and really try to make that connection at that time when you're telling a longer story, and then resume the screen share. Or if you've got visual aids or something that you can demonstrate, make the video the centerpiece at that time. In Zoom specifically, I really like the polling feature. You can build polls ahead of time and have the questions asked throughout the presentation or at the end. The Breakout Rooms feature, really cool. I haven't used it myself, but I've been a trainee in a class on diversity and inclusion recently, where there were maybe 12 of us in the class. And at one point, the instructors used the breakout rooms to have 3 or 4 of us off separately. They came to us, gave us a problem, asked us to talk it over for a few minutes, and then come back to the larger group and share it. That's a really powerful tool. I've also shared some worksheets via the chat. You can share files and maybe give people a few minutes to work on that. Maybe definitions of words, what they think they are, and then you just come back and talk to them. It's a little bit more engaging. I'd say some advantages of the Zoom format. I think people are more apt to just type in questions and ask them, where they'd maybe be a little bit reticent before if they're in a large group situation. So I think that can be really useful. It can be difficult to manage what's going on in the webinar format if you don't have multiple monitors and you aren't really prepared to do that. So I recommend practicing that. When you're done with a Zoom session, you can run a poll report and see the answers people gave to those poll questions, those quiz questions. You could use that like a graded proof of knowledge for, like Jill was talking about demonstrating that we actually conveyed knowledge. You can run an attendance report to get a little bit more simple, who was here for how long.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably, not the most ideal thing, but you can record that session. And if you've got 1 or 2 people that weren't able to make it, you can share that with them, come up with a way to test their knowledge. Again, not the most ideal thing, but it can be useful.
Yeah, so Matt, I'd like to jump in on that if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one element that I've found here is it takes a little coordination from an instructor standpoint, but I like to flip back and forth between a OneNote page where you can actually type some notes and you can preload some questions and capture the elements within the discussion happening online. As far as, getting the information as a student, you're not gonna, if you're going real fast through slides, it's not gonna sink in. And so I found that time to just kind of step back a minute, type some notes out as we go through the session allows for that information to settle a bit. And then you're going to get better questions and stuff coming from your audience that you can then answer. You can also have recorded sessions and then monitor it live. Have this kind of interactive chat like you guys have here, right? Going on during the session. And you almost get to play an active role as a facilitator instead of just the main moderator. So those are a couple tricks I've been using I think they're useful.
Yeah, you really have to bring the energy to these things. I mean, anybody who's been on stage for theater before or done some online teaching, it's very challenging to talk into the void. So having engagement, really appreciate everybody who's contributed to our Q&A so far. There have been a few answers that have gotten kicked over, or questions that have gotten kicked over to our answers tab that we will address in the Q&A portion. But just having those side conversations, hearing people's reactions, it's really nice. Zoom isn't always the best at this outside of the chat feature, but having some live reactions and saying, oh yeah, that was great, or thank you, great point, is just really nice. And it's a really positive feedback loop to keep the presenter engaged and kind of giving more energy to the people who are learning. Brock, I really loved your idea of keeping classes small. Sometimes when you're able to sort of hide in the group of 20, 30, 70 people, or so, it can feel very easy to tune out and like you're not being really spoken to, more spoken at.
Yeah. Brock was talking about bringing the energy, and Matt said, talking into the void. I think from the trainer's perspective, especially if you're used to being in front of real human beings in the same room, if you, when you're presenting, can stand, it just changes the energy that you bring as the presenter. Yeah, Brock, are you standing now? Yeah, I am too. And the other thing that I've found, just over the years of like doing webinars and then comparing that to an in-person live speaking engagement of some kind, when you're with human beings and you're bringing this energy, right? And the energy can be deflected into the audience, but when it's to a screen, it does something different to your body. It's you get this adrenaline rush when you're in front of a live audience. And when you're in front of a live audience and you're projecting the same way and you're standing, but it's into the void, there's nowhere for that adrenaline to go. Brock's nodding his head, so is Laura, right? So I've learned by trial and error. I would finish like a webinar and I would get this terrible stomach ache. And I'd be like, Brock's nodding his head. I'm like, what has happened? And it's that adrenaline. It just like stuck in your body. And I had to get good at finish presenting, go for a walk, do some laps around the block, around your house or something to dissipate that energy that you brought from however many hours or whatever amount of training that you've done. Trial and error that way.
Great. Yes, agreed 100% on all counts here. So another question here. This one is for you, Jill and Laura. Can you recommend any easy to implement tricks that can help keep training fun or at least less dense and tiring? We spoke a little bit about keeping energy high. I love standing. Unfortunately, my desk isn't set up too well for that, but definitely I think when I can stand or pace or talk on calls like that, it helps, I think, measurably. So anything, and Brock, also, if this is something you'd like to chime in on, questions are just easy things that you can pick up and add some percentage points to the quality of online training.
Yeah. We've, so many people have talked about stories and the power of story and being that storyteller and bringing those things in as the trainer, but flip that around and ask your participants to tell their stories. I know that's a little bit risky because you might have somebody that rambles on and on and on and on. So you might want to set some parameters around that. Laura's laughing because she's had this problem before where, you like open up the floor and it's like, oh my gosh, when are they going to shut up? And so, to maybe put some parameters on, could you say a couple of sentences? Could you tell a story in a minute? Something like that to make it more conversational. And it gives you a little bit of a break, but it also lets them engage and share what they might be thinking in their head as well. In this virtual world that we are all living in right now, I really think there's a power of cameras. And if your employees or the people that you're training have the ability to have a camera, I would ask that they have them on so that you can look people in the eye. They can look you in the eye. You can see where someone might be like quizzical in their face, like they didn't understand or see something that we would normally get when we're in a live setting with someone. I mean, I think those would be the tips that I have in addition to using those breakout rooms. I think they're really phenomenal, getting people to engage and talk with one another on a prompt that you might give them or an assignment.
Yeah, I fully agree. There's a lot of little things that you can do to just add interest into your webinar or something like that. Like I mentioned, the OneNote item that I've kind of follow going through, I like to provide that back at the end. Also, of course, with the recording or whatever. But in a normal classroom, we're used to taking notes as students. And on this online environment, I don't know if any of you have tried to teach children math online, but it's, you kind of need that white paper to get your thoughts out, work through the problems, do the diagrams. Of course, there's some elements available for all of that on here, which is fortunate, right, that we have these tools these days. But I don't know how I learn. I need to write it down or it doesn't happen. And so I like to provide that option for my students as well. And then I would just say the other challenge these days, especially in the online learning environment, is that if you have a series of webinars set up and you need, some time from your students to work in the interim, it's hard because we have webinar all week long these days. This is our new reality. And it's hard to really dedicate that time and space for learning and thinking, and little things that you can do, like just, a calendar reminder, just to block off some time, follow up with a one-on-one phone call, conversation. That's going to make your training that much more rich and meaningful for your audience.
And in terms of training just being meaningful there, I think that this again gets back to this common point we found a lot on these webinars, that COVID has made people much more invested in their own safety. And that is with training as well as many other aspects of safety, this is a great opportunity to really capitalize on that and use that increased engagement to have your educational content just land a lot more completely. Great. And then Brock, last question here before we switch over to our live portion of the webinar. So how do you approach situations where the hands-on element of training is absolutely necessary? So this could be, a situation where you're training on a piece of equipment or, something similar in that regard. Have you encountered that one before?
Yeah. There's been some questions about this in the chat too. We said absolutely necessary there in the question, but sometimes you might be able to create a quick little video with a knowledgeable operator of the equipment, something like that. Our fire extinguisher training that we typically do, you generally think of that requiring hands-on training, but we've put together some pretty comprehensive videos showing how to use it. And then what I do is I invite people, if they want to come one-on-one, two-on-one, and really get the hands-on experience, we're more than happy to do that. It's just not practical to line 50 people up in a row though and do fire extinguisher training like we used to. We here at the University of Nevada, Reno have mandatory laboratory safety hands-on training that follows general online training that people have to complete first. That's been on hiatus here pretty much since the pandemic started, but we've got a couple hundred people that are in need. So we've submitted a plan to our vice president for research on how to do this safely. So before the pandemic, we had 16 people and 3 instructors crammed in a tiny little room with rotating through modules through different stations in the lab, and that's just not going to work. So we stepped back, we looked at what hands-on components we can maybe just do as demonstrations, how we can restructure it a little bit. We're going to have 4 students and a single instructor able to distance a little bit more in the room and still do have that face-to-face or mask-to-mask time, I guess, as it is now, but in a much smaller group. We're starting to resume CPR training. Right, that's kind of a scary thing, but several of us are American Heart Association instructors, and we've got a lot of grad students that go into hospitals and need basic life support training, and we've always offered this to them, and we want to continue to do that. So the American Heart Association has put out some guidance, as has our local training center, for no breaths, increased sanitization. And we're going to go the route of the heart code classes, they're called, where a lot of the curriculum's done online ahead of time, but they come in for practice, they come in for testing on those procedures. So it cuts down the face-to-face time more than 50%, right? We're maybe 40% of the time that we're going to be in the same room, and we're going to do that with a handful of students and a single instructor. Other trainings where we typically require hands-on things, sometimes we have for like dangerous goods shipping, for example. I teach researchers on campus how to ship really low hazard biological materials, dry ice. I feel comfortable training them how to do that. We require that every 2 years. So people that are coming back as a refresher, they're just participating on Zoom. But those that are doing it for the first time, we're asking that they be in person, and they're going to get an opportunity to practice. Maybe we help them with their first couple of shipments. We don't give them full authority to go out and ship, but we help them in person on those shipments, so we know that they can do it safely.
Um, I would like to chime in on that in terms of, this pandemic is sort of forces the being the mother of invention, right? And reinventing the way that you do things, which made me think of something that my company got busy doing. And some of you who are listening may be in similar situations as well. First aid, CPR training, rather, like Brock was talking about. One of the necessity mother of invention things that came out with HSI, the company that I work for, is we're an accrediting, you work with an accrediting body. Some of you work with accrediting bodies for things that you're doing. And we're able to get that for what's called remote skills verification, specifically for CPR. And so that the same cards can be issued in a Zoom setting with just a couple of people, where the mannequin, a portion of a mannequin, is sent out to people that they can either keep or sent back for cleaning. And and we're able to do that by just being bold and asking for accreditation and changing the way that you do things. And there's definitely some people who are listening today who probably have accredited things too. And so if you have an idea that you can toss to that accrediting body and find a new way to do things, because it's necessity is the mother of invention, and that's some pretty cool stuff that can come out of this as well. Yeah.
I agree completely. Brock, I think you also had a great point there that we said absolutely. And all of a sudden, this pandemic really has us questioning what is truly absolutely necessary, and coming up with creative solutions is so important. And Laura, it sounded like you had something you wanted to add.
Just wanted to say again, kind of going back to that risk assessment conversation, people actually have some decent experience these days talking about risk in terms of, do I go to, family barbecue? Do I go shopping? When do I go shopping, right? What do I do here? And so as creative as you can, and I said that's the one thing I really like about training, is that you get to be creative. Use those examples as a starting point for the conversation, right? To say like, well, you have some experience with this. What are some things you consider in your risk assessment? Okay, that's great. Now let's take it back into the lab and see how we would handle it there.
All right. Well, fantastic. We have really filled up the time here, and we have a ton of questions to work through. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our live Q&A here. Just before we do, a quick plug for our upcoming webinars. So this is the EHS Community Connection webinar. They are here to serve you, the environmental health and safety professional community. And to do that, it is just so helpful to understand and know what is important to you. So today we have a word cloud. If you go to menti.com, enter in this code, you can let us know what topics you're interested in. We've already got a few responses here. Fantastic. We'd love to see more from everybody as we go. We'll be going back and forth to this during the question and answer portion. And we also do have a poll here. To keep these webinars going, we do really need panelists. We have a huge amount of appreciation for Brock, Jill, and Laura today for lending their time and their expertise to be on this webinar. And if you are interested in participating, if you know somebody in your network who would be interested, I'd love to be able to talk with them and maybe get them on. It'd be great to keep these going. So I'll leave that poll up for a little bit and give everybody some time to answer it. And I guess we can go ahead and move on to the Q&A. I guess one more thing before we get started. We have recently implemented a certificate program for these webinars. You've all asked for it, so now we're delivering them. So on Monday, certificates for this webinar for people who have attended, you can request one and get it, and we'll be sending out a reminder to everybody who attended or didn't attend that these are available. Right. And to kick things off, I'm going to go into the answered tab here. It looks like a question got moved over there. This one is from Mary, and Mary wanted to know, what programs or tools do you use to create engaging online safety training? And in particular, she's concerned about how to make non-instructor-led classes more engaging.
Yeah, so Mary, we use a product called iSpring Suite. I used an older version that was called iSpring Pro. I think it's more of a subscription-based thing at the time. Other products people have used that I know in similar fields are Adobe Captivate, although it sounds like in the comments that it seems to be a little bit outdated. And I know the majority of people use a product called Articulate Storyline when you're building in-house online training programs. And pretty much all of those are essentially an add-on to PowerPoint, something that we're familiar with. They have a little bit of a learning curve, and you could put out a narrated video or kind of a step-by-step training program where there are quizzes throughout, different sort of quiz options. There can be some where you're putting a marker on a particular place in an image, something like that. Some word match things, and that can be some really engaging training content. The output of those programs is a wide range of things. Historically it was Flash video, which is going the way of the dodo here next month. So HTML5 videos or just MP4 videos, but ideally SCORM packages, which you need some sort of learning management system that's going to be able to display that. So you're going to need a little bit of help from your IT department or your group, or you're going to need an off-the-shelf learning management system that's able to display those things. Canvas can do it. We have reasons that Canvas doesn't really work well for tracking employee training, but it can display some of that training natively.
Just a shameless plug here, Project SACE Lab. We have a learning management system ourselves, but we're able to kind of rent it out as a per needed basis. And so if you have something really simple you just want to load on there, you're able to manage it. You're able to have instructors, all of that on there, to integrate all of the different files, Captivate, this or that you may need. And also any Zoom sessions recording. So it's a nice option, especially for the smaller establishments who, it gets expensive. I had to pay for like the very fancy Zoom for a little bit because I was doing simultaneous translated live webinars, and you can't keep that up forever, especially if you're just starting out. So I just wanted to offer that out to you guys. Reach out if you have any more questions or anything like that. But like I said, you guys wear a lot of hats, and training is a lot of fun, but it takes up a lot of time, and want to just make sure that you are able to get the information out to your audience.
Right. I wish I had my instructional design team in my pocket that I could just pull out and let them explain how they do what they do. We have a team of instructional designers at HSI that develops all of our online training. So I wish I could dig into that deeply, but Brock, you answered a lot of really specific questions about different products that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on here. Next question is from Lemomi. She would like to know, along the lines of not making your presentations too busy, how do you deal with English as a second language faculty, staff, students, or other personnel? Some of her slides are awfully busy to accommodate those folks, and that she feels bad, but she's not sure how else to explain things to them. So is accommodating ESL something that any of you have encountered before?
Yeah, it's the hardest thing ever. It's the hardest thing ever because it's so vitally important, right? I mean, we talk about access to information, and a language barrier is certainly a barrier to access to the information that people need to keep themselves healthy and safe and know that there's dignity in their work. When a job that I had previously was in support of the poultry industry. And the poultry industry has many, many languages classically that are spoken in the farms and processing plants. And my particular company had 5 languages spoken, which is not very many compared to some of my cohorts in other places where they have up to 45 on a given day in their workforce. And I used people other employees within the company to interpret the spirit of training for me. I know that sounds really clunky, but that's how we did it. Like I would use my online platform so that the same information was being conveyed so it wasn't like like people were developing all their own training, but I could facilitate in English and have the person who spoke that particular language with me to then deliver the spirit of what was being said on screen or what was being said out of my mouth. I've also done that, pass the microphone down to 5 different interpreters. I don't know that I would recommend that. That was so hard to try to come up with, I'm going to say this sentence, and then by the time it comes back around to me, what was my next, how am I going to make that next thing happen? I wouldn't recommend that. But if you have internal people, I know that's not perfect. That is what I've done in the past as well. And then trying to ask those questions so you can check on knowledge transfer, and really asking people to give specific stories about their experiences, or stop training in portions and say, this is how this, applies to you. And then ask a question that's really granular and specific so that they can ask questions, give ideas, or say, hey, I don't have this, or this is broken, or I didn't know that in the past, but that's such a challenge.
Yeah, and I'd just like to dovetail on that. So technologically speaking, right now, there's a lot of new tools that will create a transcript for you, and at least Google Translate that transcript kind of, on the fly. You can do that, especially for recorded sessions. It's a little easier. So that's an option. There's some tools that are coming out to help with that. And subtitles are a whole lot easier than they used to be as well. But again, if there's a lot of things on the slide and you're asking somebody to kind of keep track to the bottom too in a different language, that's kind of hard.
Right. And then talking with your internal staff as well, who are the ESL people, about what might not transfer. When I worked in the poultry industry, specifically with turkeys, one of the languages spoken in my facility was Karen. And in the Karen language, they did not have a word for turkey. And so we had to come up with how to describe what this white fluffy thing was. And so really talking with the people in your facility to find out what might not transfer, that might be common vernacular that you use, so that you're not making assumptions on what people might not know, because there isn't a common word for it.
I think just using good accessibility practices helps a lot with people who have English as a second language, in addition to people that might be hearing impaired or vision impaired. So if you have a direct written transcript before or after the fact, you have closed captions, being able to have the written language is going to go a long way to help people that might struggle to follow along with the spoken language.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And I'll just add on here, I think we've hit on this across all of our panelists, but knowing your demographics, being able to understand what the majority language speakers might be, where those problems might come up. Maybe they don't have a word for turkey. Maybe, 80% of your people speak a certain language, and it might be a little easier to recruit somebody to help you out. Can sometimes ease some of that burden. And just going to go ahead and let's do one more question here before we move on to our next portion. This time's really flying by here. So let's see if we can get this one quickly. From Erica, we have, what is your strategy and planning process when creating a training? In other words, what is your roadmap to success once a training need is identified?
Can I jump in on this? I was just typing an answer. I'll keep it short. So Erica, I would recommend the ADDIE design cycle. It starts with assessment, trying to figure out what your objectives are. The second D starts, first D starts for design. So now you start thinking about the design elements, the stories, the kind of layout. Again, another question was like, do I use a video? Do I use a SOP? These types of things. So you can start to think about those elements there, and then you essentially gather your content for the second D, which is development. The I stands for implementation. So this is actually delivering training, and E is the evaluation strategy to, again, improve your training and go forward. So just Google that. There's lots of information out there on that. It's quite useful to keep you on track. I go into rabbit holes all the time, especially with the content section, but match it to your objectives and that will keep you on track.
All right, well, it is 3 p.m. Eastern here. Thanks to everybody, we have a really active Q&A. This is fantastic. And as happens with all of our other webinars, we have more questions than we have time for. So we'd like to be able to go over an extra 15 minutes and just continue answering these questions rather than just sort of having to end now. Of course, our panelists have already donated a lot of time here. So if anybody needs to jump, doesn't have that extra time in their schedule, feel free to do so. But otherwise, also, you are welcome to stay on for another 15 minutes and we'll answer, kind of get through as many questions as we can here. All right. Great. So next question here, continuing to go on, is from Michelle. Michelle would like to know approximately how much training should an employee receive every year? Over 10 hours? And then she specified asking for general lab practices, such as chemical management, biosafety, not specific training for equipment. So it sounds like more kind of upkeep training on, sort of basic skills.
Yeah, I'll start, and Laura, maybe you finish when it comes to lab things. So I get this question a lot as a former compliance person and someone who helps support a team that works with online training. So that's really a common question, like how many hours is it? There isn't a formula for that. There absolutely isn't, unless it's specifically dictated in a specific law, where it says, like you have to, if you're going after your OSHA 10-hour certification, obviously that's 10 hours of training. It can't be any less. 30 hours, same thing. And there's some within, Brock, probably correct me if I'm wrong, within the HAZWOPER law, where it specifies the number of hours of training you have to have. But it's essentially, the burden on the employer is to figure out which laws do I need to do training on that, my employees have exposure. So then I need to do training, and then breaking open that CFR, like I was talking about in the beginning, and make sure all of those elements of training are covered. There isn't anything in there unless it's specifically covered in a law, like we just talked about, that says time. So as long as the information is being conveyed and that the knowledge has transferred, then that's sufficient. In terms of how often, again, that's by law, which is really crazy, right? So some laws say annual, some laws say if we have someone who hasn't followed something or we've had an accident, then do retraining. Some will say, like with the forklift operator training one, it's every couple of years instead of every year, and each law has its own little nuances, which is just really tricky. And so it's going into those laws and figuring that out. I have done a comprehensive study of the entire 1910 CFR and written all that out in a particular document that's turned into an online quiz that I can direct anybody to if they want, because it's such a common question. But regarding lab things, Laura, I'll tag off to you.
No, I would thank you. No, it's good to keep in mind the regulatory perspective there. And I would say, in my experience, most institutions, whether at university or other, at least have one annual refresher training. And that can be, a couple hours long, maybe in person or even online. And then it's really a matter of going to each lab and seeing what is needed. And it takes a little more effort, but as safety professionals, that's what's going to get you not only awareness of what everybody else needs, but then you also get to be that face, that resource, that person who can answer questions if they come up. So yeah, don't limit to yourself to just a certain thing. I just say, get your face out there, make those connections.
Yeah, Laura has a good point. You need to assess what's been effectively conveyed and what hasn't through regular inspections, through analysis of injuries, just general evaluations of what people think that they want more training on. All those things are going to help you determine who needs what training and how much they need.
Mhm. You know, in terms of that FaceTime with people, you can turn your inspections or audits that you're doing in a facility into mini training sessions. If you want to think about micro learning, it's a perfect time to bring people with you. If you're in a particular department, work area, lab, Laura, like you're talking about, or maybe you have a safety committee and you're going to do your regular audits and inspections. And those of us who are safety and health professionals know that we store so much of this information in our heads, right? We don't necessarily have a checklist, though we might, but there's a lot of information that is stored in our head. So if you can bring along a group of people with you, you know, if it's 2 people, 5 people, a committee, and take them on this journey with you as you're looking to do hazard evaluation, you're looking to identify hazards, you can do many sessions with them right at that time. You know, if you're opening electrical panels and you're seeing that there's a blank that's open and a bus bar is exposed, it's a great time to explain why that's a hazard. You know, if you're inspecting your fire extinguishers or your emergency lights, it's a great time to explain what that is. If you're checking on the guarding of your bandsaw or your press brake, or checking the leads on your welders and you're, you know, looking at the whole lead and people are wondering, what are you looking at? It's a perfect opportunity to take time to explain what that is so people know what the hazard is that you're looking for, what you're finding that's right, what you're finding that isn't, so they know what it means to them in their particular jobs. So don't, you know, remember that's a piece of training too that you can use when you're doing those inspections of your facilities.
Yeah, Michelle responded with a comment here, thanking us and also mentioning that she was scared about training fatigue. And definitely, yeah, that's a very real thing. It's sort of the point of the webinar here. And, you know, this is where I'd say pull your people, you know, ask them, hey, are you experiencing training fatigue? Do you find yourself zooming out? You may or may not be able to use that information, but at least it will help you sort of get a sense of, okay, am I finding that right point of balance between these things? Just taking a quick look at our word cloud here. Looks like we got some really great responses here. So thank you everyone for your participation, letting us know kind of what you're interested in and what topics you'd like to see more of. We'll definitely get to use this and really appreciate it. So a question a little bit farther down in the Q&A that I'm very interested in is from Lori, asking about Lori asked, what about accounting for accessibility needs in Zoom or other trainings, and how are you designing this at your institutions? So, you know, of course, online training gives us many options for accessibility, and, you know, what are we doing to make those happen and identify, of course, accessibility needs?
Sorry, I don't have, this is one of the questions I was actually looking forward to learning more about. Sorry.
Accessibility, I feel like, Brock, I feel like that's up your alley in
Yeah,
terms
a
of
little
the
bit.
things that, yeah, and I know that educational institutions have a lot to do with that.
I'm also just going to chime in really quickly here before Brock gives his answer, which is this is one of my favorite moments of these webinars. You know, these are the EHS community webinars. We have a huge group of people who are all safety professionals and experts. Definitely, if you have experience with accessibility in online trainings, if you've solved a problem, even if you've encountered a problem and don't have an answer, you know, get that conversation going. We can probably find a good solution. And it's not always about us having all the answers, but it is about us coming together to find those answers. So Brock, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I was looking for the training or for the question itself, and I don't see. Oh, there. What about how do you account for accessibility needs in Zoom or other training? How are you designing this at your institution? So, yeah, accessibility in a live Zoom session is pretty difficult. You can nominate somebody to serve as the person that's going to type out captions, right? If you knew ahead of time that you had somebody who was going to need those. I would just say in general, have your materials available to share and make sure that those materials themselves are accessible. And that's much easier said than done. I'll actually be talking at a SHEMA symposium here in a couple of weeks for those of you that are in university safety about our challenges with accessibility. Yeah, not always the easiest thing, but having materials available to share, and just, you know, talking to the folks that might need some sort of accommodation and seeing how you can best help them.
All right, fantastic. So it looks like we are getting to the end here. I think Lori had another question asking about if anybody is recording and distributing Zoom trainings online to attendees. Seems like a yes.
That's something that I've wanted to do. I do a lot of onboarding training with employees in our company. And especially when I have a one-off, I think, oh, I should be recording this for a day that I can't say yes, that it's not, like to be scalable, right? Because it doesn't seem to be scalable when you're doing one employee, two employees. But then I worry like I'm going to lose that personal touch. But I think just as an emergency backup plan, I need to be recording some of my onboarding training sessions, to be able to use it for that.
We do record them. We don't necessarily share it with the attendees by default. We would share the materials that were presented in that session so they can go back and cross-reference. But we would have them available if somebody would like a recording. And as Jill said, for people that weren't able to make that training, and you got one person or two people, and it's just we don't have the time to rehash that, then we make the training available in that recorded format at that point.
Yeah. I wanted to address something that was said in chat. Joe was talking about free resources and specifically was talking about using your insurance companies to be able to find some free resources. And Laura was talking earlier about CDC and being able to get good information there when we're talking about trying to find reputable sources. I wanted to offer one reputable source that particularly around this pandemic that people may not know about. That I've been working with these last since March. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, otherwise known as the NIEHS, is a department of the NIH, the National Institute of Health. And the NIEHS is an agency that comes together in times of crisis to curate training for first responders, people who are the essential workers, people who are on the front lines. So they've been doing this for decades and decades. So when there's like Ebola, H1N1, Deepwater Horizon, 9/11, they're the governmental agency that comes together to curate training. And they have done exactly that for this pandemic. And they have developed 2 online courses for essential workers and one on basic COVID-19 awareness. You'll be able to find them on the NIEHS website, as well as lots of conferences that they've been hosting throughout this time. My company, that's the shameless plug there, developed the online versions, and they're hosted on our company website as well. But NIEHS has just a wealth of resources in terms of if you want to find a trustworthy place, particularly in this time, that would be a really great place for you to go to get some information. And your insurance company, Joe, really great idea.
Well, fantastic. I mean, we have just blazed through all these questions. So a huge thank you to our panelists for being so active here and answering these, and also to our attendees for asking and answering and having so many great side conversations here. It has been a real pleasure to have you all on for this webinar and have this conversation. And Brock, we're gonna have you get back to counting here. So we'll let you go.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, we'll try to figure out our precedent is here this afternoon.
Another quick check at our word cloud here, just kind of taking a look at what is on everybody's minds for next upcoming webinars. And another big thank you. I'm sure if we could unmute everybody, it would probably be chaos, but there would be a lot of applause. Thanking everybody here for their time. So I hope everybody has a fantastic day, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah,
thanks,
thank you
Matt.
so much, Matt.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.